Welcome to Uncanny Valley. In 2004, George Soros loaned Donald Trump $160 million to build 666-foot tall Trump Tower with the help of mobster Fat Tony Salerno. That name's familiar because The Sopranos was based on him, and Matt Groening immortalised him in The Simpsons. Matt Groening, like Bill Gates, Elon Musk and Charles Kushner, were all good friends of Epstein, who started both Hillary and Trump's slush fund charities. Hillary and Trump also share a tax haven in Delaware, which makes sense because all three are cousins. Cousins and good friends with President of the World Jewish Congress, Ronald Lauder, heir to the Estee Lauder dynasty, who gave Epstein his Austrian passport, which is interesting because it was Giuliani's chief of police, Bernard Kerik, who found the passports on 9/11, handed to him by some guy. This after going to Israel in June and receiving $250,000 from Israeli billionaire Ethan Wertheimer for undisclosed services. Oh, and remember how they said that Otago text warning in the morning of 9/11 was fake? You can still Google that search term, include the title Haaretz, and you can find the exact article with them saying how great it was. The Pentagon comptroller that day was one Dov Zakheim, who is being blamed for the loss of the $4 trillion announced on the day before. He also happens to be the owner of CPS, which rolled out remote hijack technology in the American Airlines fleet in June 2001. Then, of course, there's Michael Chertoff and his role in the Patriot Act, giving Israel immunity for 9/11 and covering up the truck bombs and the 200 spies rounded up in the months following. He also just happens to own the backscatter X-ray machines that have been distributed through airports around the world. Then there's the Cheney and the anthrax vaccine that he owned, which was used on troops entering in the First Iraq War, which may have been the cause of the Iraq War syndrome. Then there's Bush, who was being investigated for cocaine before his daddy became president, and whose family were having breakfast with the Bin Ladens on the morning of 9/11. The Bin Ladens who owned the companies building the Saudi pipelines through ISIS territory in Syria. In fact, all the countries on the terror list have had a major oil pipeline in the works that they couldn't have built without the war of terror, which has killed 30 million innocent people. Half of them were women and children, let alone the refugees and the organ harvesting and the sex trafficking. Did you know 50,000 women are trafficked through Israel from East Europe every year? Or that Israel taxis are all Mercedes and high-end German cars. Even the grandparents of anyone who even lived in Europe during World War II can collect as much as $2,000 a month from the grandchildren of people who may have done absolutely nothing. Meanwhile, what do Palestinians get? Did you also know that all of Israel's PMs come from communist-occupied East Europe after the war? In fact, most all current major world leaders come from this region. Israel's first PM, Ben-Gurion, was a proud Bolshevik and spoke of a new world order ruled from the temple in Jerusalem to the Zionist Foundation of London in 1945, where he referenced 60 years of settlement. That's because the first settlers were German in 1890. Netanyahu's mentor, Menachem Begin, trained directly under one Zev Jabotinsky, who was the founder of the NKVD in Poland, which would eventually become the KGB. Poland is also where Bush and Cheney comes from, and Angela Merkel, Mr. Tusk, the British politician, Skull and Bones, the Catholic all-seeing eye, the Knights Templar, and the Holy Roman Empire. It's the size of France and Germany, but no one ever talks about it. Ever. Just like you've never heard a Palestinian speak on mainstream media. Not that truth outlets are any better. In case you missed it, the majority of truth networks are right-wing. The Red Pill, which comes from the Matrix all the way back in 1999, aka 6661, which is of note because in 1922 the Zionist Foundation declared the New World Order would begin September 17, 2001, the year 6000 of the Great Pyramid calendar, during Rosh Hashanah, Feast of Trumpets. This Feast of Trumpets is when Jesus said he would return. It is the second coming, 2,000 years after his birth, though he said he didn't know the day or the hour. Zev Jabotinsky was born September 11, 1902, which makes 9/11 his 99th anniversary. But did you also know that the producers of The Matrix, the Wachowski brothers, are now the Wachowski sisters? How's that for a red pill? Trump lives on the 66th floor of 666-foot Trump Tower. Epstein died aged 66 and a half years. Trump was inaugurated on the 100-year anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution, aged 70 years, 7 months and 7 days. He has a giant mural of Zeus on his gold-plated penthouse ceiling. Sig Heil means Hail Zeus. Führer means chosen one. Trump in Gematria is Messiah, which was a name change made in 1922 when Boris Johnson's great-granddad, an architect of the Armenian Holocaust, one Mustafa Ali Kemal, sent Herr Baron von Trumpf to America from Bavaria in 1922. Vienna, Bavaria at that time was also home to Stalin, Hitler, Trotsky, Tito, Orwell, Freud, and Franz Ferdinand, who also died starting World War I. Only they had already drawn up the Sykes-Picot Treaty in 1913, dividing up Afghanistan, Iraq, all the Middle East, with the proposal of it being after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, which was required, hence the Armenian genocide, where thousands of young Christians were crucified. Before Boris Johnson's great-granddad colluded with Churchill to use the Anzacs as cannon fodder at Gallipoli, forcing a stalemate in Europe, and for Balfour to hand over the Palestinian territories in return for Rothschild bringing America into the war and ending the stalemate. In that the breaking up of the Ottoman Empire allowed Israel to be born, when the British general rode into Jerusalem in 1917, he said, "Today I declare the Crusades won." The only thing they had to do now was convince millions of Europeans to move to the tropics, where they would become the highest ranking for skin cancer in the world. You see, the interesting thing about Hitler was all his closest staff were Zionists. His Secretary of Staff became NATO's Chief of Staff. Von Braun, the rocket scientist, of course, helped with the creation of NASA, but did you know his Nazi boss, von Dornberger, also became the first director of the Public Oversight Committee? Hitler's cook, his driver, many in the SS, his bodyguard became an Israeli spy, even his mentors and backers. And while most know of Operation Paperclip, how many know about Operation Gladio, where another 3,000 senior Nazis and were placed in senior government roles across Europe? Zionism was the only political party Hitler recognised. He even built Israel's electric and rail grids. He also realised the Havara Agreement as outlined by Theodor Herzl in his diaries in 1896. Hitler also embraced Odinism, the Nordic occult of the Aryan race, which was penned by UK Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli, who was an open ISIS worshipper. Rothschild would later buy the Suez Canal and give it to Benjamin Disraeli for his services. What's also interesting is how we were taught Hitler's life echoed Napoleon, born on the same day, invading France and Russia on the same day, even dying on the same day. Only the FBI files released in 2017 showed he actually did escape to Argentina. So who was it that just happened to choose the date of his birth as exactly 129 years after Napoleon's? What's interesting is Napoleon is a Zionist Messiah, and many of the elite today descend from his lineage, that of the Knights Templar, who, along with the Emperor Kings of the Holy Roman Empire, built the Rosslyn Chapel in 1451. This is just 20 years after they gave Count Dracul his name, meaning Order of the Dragon, for his services against the Ottoman Empire. The Order of the Dragon is a reference to Zeus. Dracula means son of the dragon, which is interesting because Chertov means son of the devil in Russian. Incidentally, Seth comes from Set, the Egyptian god of chaos and desert storms, the guiding angel Bush spoke of. It's synonymous with Setian, from which the word Satan derives, aka Santa, aka Saturn, aka Kronos, aka Krampus, the child eater from Norway, aka Nimrod. People who worship the sons of Belial, they come from Canaan. What's interesting is that Hitler chose the swastika, which was worn by Canaanite priests. But the swastika itself comes from the Hindu traditions of the Agori, who can be found along the Ganges, disposing of the human bodies. They eat human flesh and drink their own urine in ritual acts of defilement, redemption through sin, if you will. This is where we find the origins of the third eye iconography, being the Hindu bindi. They also teach reincarnation, as did the early Catholic Church. They also drink blood from a human skull called a Kabbalah, holding it above their head like so. Nikki Haley descends from these Agori. She is the proposed president for the Israeli United Nations of 70 nations. This 17-nation alliance is also listed as belonging to Gog and Magog. The Agori have a symbol which features a skull, and inside that skull you will find a swastika in one eye and the six-pointed star of Shiva in the other. That's right, the Israeli Star of David is in fact the Star of Shiva. Much like the Jolly Roger is used by pirates, and much like the skull chapels found in Poland. Canaanite priests wore swastikas on their robes, and the Vatican itself is designed after the dual-gendered form of Shiva Lingam. Vatican in Greek means sacred serpent, and even the idols Muhammad threw out of the Kaaba were Hindu idols. That's because Troy was actually a prominent port that thrived off the spice trade from India, brought to the Levant via the Great Silk Road, which in turn fueled the largest empires in history, until Islam pushed out the Byzantine Empire, establishing the Ottoman Empire in its place. In fact, among the countless misplaced historical sites, Troy, Babylon is likely Tyre, Lebanon. The Crusades were never about anything more than the control of this massive trade route, which is why there has not been a single archaeological find to corroborate the legitimate existence of a Kingdom of Israel in Palestine, which is why all they have found is Canaanite artifacts. And in fact, the Canaanite word for Saturn is Israel. The Temple of Solomon is in fact a copy of the Temple of Osiris from Elephant Island, built by King Solomon, the stepson of Nimrod, aka King Kekrops, who in fact founded Athens. The Canaanites also settled in Venice, Paris, Portugal, Wales, Scotland, and Scandinavia. But that's not all. Using their knowledge of astronomical observation, it's been shown they even made it to America, sourcing the copper that would fuel the Bronze Age and keeping their sources a trade secret, talking about flat earth and sea monsters to deter any would-be competition. It is these maps that the Crusaders found during the Crusades. Knights Templar graves have been found in California and dated to 1100 AD, which is before the Crusades even ended. These same maps showed up on one of Christopher Columbus's own sailors. Even the name Christ, meaning anointed, and Columbidae, meaning dove, can also be associated with Columbus, the goddess of pain and suffering. You know it as the Piri-Reis map, but there are others. They said it was from the Library of Alexander, but that doesn't actually make sense, unless they were found in the Levant, perhaps in the Library of Baghdad. This is why we have the compass and square, and why the pyramids are not only perfectly square, but also astrologically aligned. You can do this using what's called an azimuth to measure the arc of a heavenly body in the sky in trigonometry. But this is quite detailed information that I will cover at length in a future video. But if you do want to find out more about this specific subject, I recommend this book, The Book of Haram Biff by Christopher Lomas and Robert Knight. So, just as Jesus is a derivation of I Zeus, the name Christ is a derivation of Krishna, or Christos. It means anointed, just as mummies were baptized in sacred oils derived from cannabis and prepared for resurrection, once they had travelled the Styx on the boat of Isis, which is the boat Trump the Messiah travels on in Pet Goat 2. The pyramids representing America. Even the name America means Great Pyramid, or Pregnant Pyramid, or Spirit of Mary. We even celebrate Nimrod's birthday on Xmas, the cross being the Phoenician sun god symbol. We place our kids on his throne on the winter equinox when the sun hits its lowest azimuth of 33 degrees off the Temple of Osiris. And we do it in hopes of bringing back the sun. You see, the cross is an equinox calendar to know when to plant crops and when to harvest, which is why the Catholic, pagan and Jewish calendars are all the same. The earliest churches were solar observatories. In time, other heavenly bodies were incorporated into the script, creating what we know today as the Hellenic Ptolemaic horoscope, produced at about 100 AD by Ptolemy by combining Babylonian, Egyptian and Hindu zodiacs. This is why we have Stonehenge and the Serpent Mount and Jacob's Ladder being the steps up the pyramid, aka Cosmic Mountain, to make these sacrifices and commune with God, hence the Burning Man, the willing sacrifice, and why there are hills in Scotland named after Moloch and Baal. It's also why we have a King Arthur and a Merlin, aka the Law of Two, just like the Sith, and why Viking kings were burnt on pyres with all their property, why pagans threw swords and jewellery into bogs and lakes, aka locks, as in Moloch. In fact, the boat design is identical between all of these cultures, featuring the high serpent prow and striped sails, with a serpent or red dragon. The 13 stripes on the American flag represents the 12 disciples and one Messiah. 13 arrows in the eagle's claw, the Knights Templar. Jacques de Molay was put on trial on Friday the 13th, 1307. Napoleon was a Templar, and both his campaign and the French Revolution were in fact revenge for this. Napoleon even cursed King Philip to the 13th generation. King Louis XVI was his direct descendant, and Trump's 66th floor penthouse is designed after the palace of Louis XIV. So too we have the 13 colonies, all in reference to the 13th star sign, Serpentis. Early American settlers even found inscriptions to Moloch and Baal on stones used in temples found in the mound cities, which have been mostly destroyed even to this day, and now you know why. This RH bloodline stuff, it's actually a reference to Phoenicians. In fact, even the Hopi and Aztecs knew to fear them with prophecies about red-headed warriors returning and bearing a cross, because the cross was the Phoenician sun god symbol, hence our Phoenician alphabet, which we sound out phonetically, which is why Slavics and Hindus can understand each other's languages, and why Latin runes are all but identical to pagan runes in Tamil script, because they were all connected. The Babylonian mystery is that our kings and rulers all hail from Babylon, even King Arthur and his round table of 12 noble families. Serpentis was even re-added to the horoscope by the Vatican recently. It serves as the beginning and end of the astrological procession in 2 parts, depicted as a woman holding 2 serpents, one in each hand, similar to the pillars at the entrance to the Osiris temple, hence the Alpha and Omega. The All-Father. Hence the Alpha and Omega, and the 2 pillars portrayed either side of the Eye of Nimrod, Nimrod being the All-Father. Serpentis itself is home to constellations like the Pillars of Creation, the Cube Galaxy, and the one shaped like an eye. The word basilica derives from the word basilisk, aka serpent or dragon. And in case you're wondering, they actually did find an ancient telescope lens in Nimrod's temple in Turkey. Maga is Latin for wizard. Clan wizards burn crosses in illumination ceremonies, aka pyrites. They see fire as having the ability to cleanse or enlighten the souls of the Dark Ones. It was the Luciferian Knights Templar who became pirates, wearing an eye patch over one eye and flying false flags, getting rich off the trade routes and territory using their advanced navigational maps, until finally have to accept that the New World would have to be discovered, and revealing its existence some 3 centuries after the first Templars arrived. Maga, Magus, and Magi are all synonyms. Magicians, as in the pointy hats, which, like the bagpipes, hark back to Babylon. The concept is continued today in the form of the unicorn, representing the Messianic line of priest kings. And if you look at Rothschild and Windsor family shields, you will find they are near identical. That's because they're family. Jacob Rothschild is in fact the Queen's brother-in-law, and if you don't believe me, go look up the Duke of Kent. Then come back and tell me it's just coincidence that the Duke of Kent is also the word Freemason Grandmaster, a hereditary title reserved for the direct descendants of the Knights Templar, as revealed through the Rosalind Chapel, which ties the Royals, Trump, Trudeau, and pretty much all current world leaders. The King of Norway as well, and by implication Austro-Hungary and the Holy Roman Empire. Remember the Aquila? That's the 2-headed eagle we find on their family shields. This represents East and West Rome, as in Rome and the Byzantine Empire, lost to Islam when Byzantine fell. Are you getting it yet? If you take a map and you look at the borders of the old Kurdish territories in Greater Israel, you will find they exactly match those of Assyrian Babylon of the Hellenic Age. Isis Ra-El in Latin means throne of Baal, or Baal's throne. Saturn is also seen as the throne of Nimrod, or Kronos, having taken power from Uranus, his father, much in the tradition of the Sith. The new kills the old, the serpent sheds its skin, the Nazis transforming into Zionists. Hence we have Trump, the Masonic Führer, omega sign of Zeus in the aspect of Mars, mocked by the Pantheon as a coward and a fool. He is their false prophet. His job is to transfer economic and industrial power from the west to the Great Silk Road, which is what Brexit and the trade wars are all about. This virus is one thing, but what's already baked into this is massive famine. At +2 degrees we can't grow grain at scale, which means 90% will starve within a few short months. They've known this since the 80s, which is why they moved to lock down a global monopoly on oil. The biggest funders of climate denial are Rothschild, BP, Shell. They also militarised police, revoked the Constitution and built bunkers. They can see the writing on the wall and they want it to happen. They've even taken steps to ensure it, just like in the Georgia Holodomor under Stalin in 1933 in the Ukraine. Same time Churchill was founding Saudi Arabia to protect Israel from Arab revolt, and when Hitler was building Israel's electric and rail grids. Holocaust is Latin for burnt offering. Holodomor is Latin for pain offering. Persophones is the wife of Hades and daughter of Demeter, Demeter being the goddess of grain. Persophones is the goddess of pain and suffering, and she sits atop the Capitol building in DC, aka Rome and the Potomac, complete with 7 hills, aka New Jerusalem. And if you remember, the Georgia Guidestones included the initials of RCC, the Roman Catholic Church, or Rosicrucians, who also built the Statue of Liberty. So who is the Statue of Liberty? She is Isis. Rosicrucian itself is Latin for golden cup, a reference to the woman's vulva, aka the Messianic line, aka the crown of gold. The Dan Brown references in the Da Vinci Code. Only this is the line of Canaanite priest kings, aka the God King emperors of Rome, of which Harry descends, born on a lunar eclipse by induced birth on the summer equinox, much like Trump. And who is Isis? She is the mother of Horus, wife of Osiris, queen of Babylon, aka Semiramis. She holds her torch aloft searching for Osiris, who has been chopped into 13 pieces, missing only the phallus. She fashions one out of gold, performing blood sex magic to resurrect him as Horus, son of Osiris, the Babylonian who built the Temple of Osiris, where Solomon learnt the secrets of blood sex magic from the angels Harut and Mahut. So when we worship the Trinity and call Jesus Lord or God, what we are doing is elevating Mary to Tiamat, aka Lilith, the Mother of God, Queen of Heaven, female deity who brought forth matter from the abyss, which I probably think has something to do with the Milky Way. Just as our 7-day week is based on the 7 heavenly bodies visible in our sky, one for each heavenly Messiah, Zion of Zeus, aka sons of Belial, which is why Horus, Nimrod, Apollo, Heracles and Thor are all portrayed with one eye missing. The beast who suffers a mortal wound but doesn't die, rather is reincarnated as our tyrants and our dictators. This is why the target of all major genocides in the 20th century were all 3 Orthodox Abrahamic faiths, because none of them worship the Trinity, and in some cases expose this conspiracy far too easily. The Orthodox Christian Armenians, for example, whose traditions and worships were virtually indistinguishable from Sunni Islam. They don't believe in a Trinity or resurrection. They wear hijab and ban usury, which is what made the Templars rich. Remember too that Saudi Arabia is Wahhabi, not Islamic. Wahhabis make up less than 1% of all Muslims, and they are rejected outright by Islam as violent extremists. Meanwhile, the UK trains their police and military. America provides them weapons, and Israel treats their wounded. Trump and Israel were even trying to give them nukes. Hitler's Arabs, the Mujahideen, the Pakistani rape gangs, who Tommy Robinson was actually trying to get off, by the way, and the gay bridge-throwing Indonesians, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Al-Nusra, they're all Wahhabis. They're all our allies, a Western proxy army giving us an excuse to bomb innocent Muslims for things they never did. Israel even funds Hamas via Qatar, using Islamic radicals to destabilize legitimate democracies. The Qatari royals being clients of Epstein, who, by the way, had a Wahhabi funeral, when, like Osama bin Laden, where no grave is marked. Wahhabism arose just after Sabbatai Zebi made his conversion in 1666, but was of little consequence until the Crown gave them the Saudi Peninsula in 1934. The Saudi royals are confirmed on Mir, and the Yemen War was to chase down Saudi rebels who were working to overthrow this Western-backed monarchy. Of course, Epstein's mentor was gay KGB asset Roy Cohn, who covered up the Rosenberg scandal, just like Dershowitz, Giuliani and Newt Gingrich covered up Jonathan Pollard, just like Chertoff and his cousin at Popular Mechanics did with 9/11. Roy Cohn's gay KGB mentor Meyer Lansky worked under cross-dressing Edgar J. Hoover, which suggests to me that Roy Cohn was the one behind the Boys Town and Franklin's scandals, running young boys for Reagan and Bush, covered in the conspiracy of silence, where rabbis were caught harvesting organs and sending the profits to Israel, just like they've been caught doing in every major war zone since Kosovo. Thus we have a man who worships Zeus, who descends from the Canaanite priests, Knights Templar, God King Emperor, Messianic Rothschild line, who lives on the 66th floor of 666-foot Trump Tower, who called himself the Chosen One, King of Saturn in the rebuilt temple in Jerusalem, who showed up on Christ's 2000th birthday and the 99th anniversary of the founder of the KGB, who has myriad ties to 9/11 and was inaugurated on the 100-year anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution. What we have on paper is an alliance, but the underlying and overall architecture is Latin. Thus I propose that the Nordic Nazis and Slavic Bolsheviks, who both descend from the region of Turkey, aka Babylon, are trying to rebuild the Assyrian Empire and enforce sun worship via Israel in the Noahide laws. This means all major world leaders are relatives, cousins, and that means that the world is Queen's Commonwealth under maritime law and everything else is just Hegelian. Their right-wing Jesuit shills will continue to use plausible deniability, communist appeals to populism, and weaponized narcissism until we are all fractured and balkanized like Palestine. Just as they use Saudi Wahhabis to portray Muslims as terrorists, so too they use anti-Semites to both drive Jews to Israel and promote more and more totalitarian legislation. And the left will enable this by being as useless and as toothless as they can possibly get away with. Pelosi and Schumer and Trump are all on the same team, for example. Pelosi's dad was a mobster too. You see, the voters on the left stopped supporting apartheid during Obama's presidency. Now the only governments that are sympathetic to it are right-wing neo-Nazis. Little do they know that Israel is a Vatican-owned, Russian-run vassal state, and that 6 out of 7 new immigrants are non-Jewish Russians, which is why in the last 5 years over 2 million Israelis have immigrated. They've left, and of those that remain, half want to leave. Only Israel isn't issuing them their passports. Trump threatened America's Jews as disloyal because in fact 80% of them don't support Zionism or Israel, and they do not believe that they represent Jewish interests. In fact, most of their support comes from primarily white Christians trying to meet the terms of their own scriptural apocalypse, and why Putin's own rabbi uses the Bible to interpret the Talmud, because they're using it as a script. There is no escape, no leaders are coming to save us. The whole point of being anti-globalism was to balkanize and isolate any kind of legitimate resistance, to destroy public institutions and control political dialogue. World War I was to create it. World War II was to populate it. World War III has been to establish a global monopoly on oil and trade via the territories of Assyrian Babylon, which is made rich via the Great Silk Road, which leads to the Ganges and the Indus Valley civilization. The only possible future that doesn't involve this Hellenic New World Order is where we unite as human beings, without labels, without political affiliations, tribal or ethnic, to recognize that a tiny percentage rule through monarchy and monopoly, and call for direct democracy, where there are no politicians and where communities can decide their own destinies through citizen-initiated referendums. With thresholds and a social contract, people can vote not just a yes and a no, but can call for redrafts and vetoes, with thresholds that reflect the severity of the policy and the nature of the population it will affect. I've seen many calling for violent revolution, but this is just what they want. I could make a big spiel about non-violence, but let's just look at the numbers. 1 in 4 violent revolutions succeed, whereas for peaceful velvet revolutions, it's 1 in 2. So it should be a no-brainer. In many ways, what they're trying to do with Antifa and the Proud Boys is to recreate World War II on US soil. You even have many of the same place names, and it's the same people with the same script and the same goals. What's more, we can save the planet, and on a dime. 90% of beef production is subsidised. This means for every $1 burger you buy, everybody else has to pay the other 9. Methane from beef production makes up to 51% of all greenhouse emissions. If we let the free market reign and end beef communism, we can literally halve emissions overnight. And heart disease and obesity, by the way. We also need to turn the world into one made of hemp, used in construction and manufacturing and packaging. We can make biodegradable packaging so that plastic need not be an issue ever again. Even food. Subsidise hemp manufacture as the moonshot technology. It is the best form of carbon sequestration known to man. It can reinvigorate crop land. It can do everything. To top it all off, we can use thorium energy, which is clean, safe, easy to set up, and can process radioactive and toxic waste into the best cancer medicine known to man, all while providing energy that is so cheap and abundant that money and oil would become obsolete. The cost of your entire lifetime's worth of energy with thorium energy costs less than $100. And personally, if you ask me, I think that's their plan, after they've starved us all out. Each of these topics will be covered individually in future videos, with the obligatory documentation and much more. And as I get more experience with YouTube, my production values should get better. All my work is open source, as it should be, so please use it as you like. But if you do have specific questions or would like to see some of the data, just ask in the comments. I've already compiled a number of albums on my account covering key aspects of each topic that you can scroll through at your own pace to get a better idea of the big picture. I'll also include a list of channels that I recommend. So, until next time, I'll see you when I'm looking at you.